Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Yuen Woo-Ping's movie, Drunken Master. Bottoms up. So this is a 1978 Hong Kong kung fu movie, starring a comparatively young, at least, Jackie Chan. It is a martial arts comedy, centering ultimately around the practice of drunken boxing, which is, I think, a really interesting form of kung fu, of traditional Chinese martial arts. This is a coming-of-age tale as well. This is a story in which Freddy Wong, played by Jackie Chan, has to grow up, basically. So I wanted to say this right now. I'm going to call him Freddy Wong. I'm going to use the names of characters from the dubbed version that I watched on YouTube. In the original Cantonese language version, it was Wong Fei Hung. But I'm going to use the dubbed names. So, Freddy Wong. He is a mischievous rapscallion. He is a practitioner of kung fu in the school of his father, Robert Wong. But he is also overconfident, he is self-assured, and he is prone to an irresponsible practice of challenging people to fighting. Early in the film, we see Freddy mocking and then ultimately defeating in a fight the assistant teacher in his father's school. That's important. Keep that in mind. Then he and his kung fu school buddies go out into the marketplace, and they're like, hey, look at that sexy chick over there. This is very awkward. Complimenting of her. The dialogue here is very awkward. Basically, they're like, she's really, really attractive, but it's bad because it's dubbed from Cantonese into English, and it's from 1978, so it's very awkward. But basically, Freddy's like, I bet you all dinner that I could get her to hug me. So he plays this trick on her with an eel. She jumps into his arms. Then her mom shows up and is like, hey, stop hitting on my daughter all creepily. And he's like, alternately, I won't. And then she kicks his ass. Then they leave, the mother and daughter. Freddy then encounters a rather dickish young rich guy who breaks a poor man's jade amulet that he was trying to sell and refuses to pay for it. Freddy is like, I will now beat you up, which he proceeds to do. Freddy then goes home. His father, Robert Wong, is hanging out with Freddy's aunt and female cousin. You might see where this is going. The woman who kicked Freddy's ass, his aunt, is in his father's home, and the woman he was trying to basically get to hug him is his cousin. Freddy tries to not reveal who he is to them. He is unsuccessful. And when the aunt is like, yeah, this kid accosted us in the market, Robert Wong, Freddy's father, is like, I will beat you to death. At which point the aunt is like, no, Robert, you must not kill your son. That is not a good thing. Keep that in mind as well. Um, Robert is like, all right, I will punish you, Freddy, by making you sit in horse stance with some cups of water on your shoulders, on your legs, and on your head for like 5 hours. Um, Freddy gets his friend to come and like put a stool under him while he's doing this, so it ends up being not that difficult. At which point, Robert is like, all right, that's it. I'm going to send for So-Hai, also called Beggar So or So-Chan. Um, So-Hai is this like amazing kung fu instructor who has a reputation for crippling his students because of how stringent his methods are. Freddy is not keen on this, um, and so he runs off. He goes to a restaurant where he eats a ton of food and then tries to stiff this older, rich looking dude with the bill, only to be confronted by uh, a person in that restaurant about not paying the bill, at which point Freddy claims the older, rich looking dude is his father. Keep this in mind as well. Um, that guy is like, that's not your father, because that's my father, and he owns this restaurant. Now we're going to beat you up because you've tried to steal this food. During the process of this, there's an old drunk guy who ends up getting involved in the fight when they kind of crash into him. And he basically beats up all of the people who are assailing Freddy. He and Freddy run off, at which point the drunk old guy reveals that he is So-Hai. He is the one who's supposed to train slash cripple Freddy. So-Hai beats up Freddy and then basically takes Freddy to this little hut where they're going to live and train. Freddy makes various attempts to escape, including at one point wrapping So-Hai in a giant jar of water, giant vat of water, with a lid over it and a rock on top, even saying that he hopes So-Hai drowns before he runs off. Who Freddy finds when he is in his underwear, drying out his clothing, he is confronted by a dude called Thunderleg. Yes, Thunderleg, or Thunderfoot. Yim Tit Sam in the original. So Thunderleg is a kung fu assassin. Basically, you can give him money and he will beat people to death with his devil's kick maneuver, which is like a 70% leg-based kung fu style. They get into a fight. Thunderleg kicks Freddy's ass, humiliates him, and then Freddy goes back to So-Hai, basically to sort of beg to be taken back as his student. They do a bunch of training, and then finally So-Hai starts teaching Freddy drunken boxing. So this is a technique, the way I understand it from Wikipedia, so this is not the most reliable thing in the world. If I'm wrong about this, put it in the comments, let me know. There are two broad schools of drunken boxing. There's Shaolin and there's Taoist drunken boxing. So-Hai, I believe, is teaching a version of Taoist drunken boxing, which is based on the story of the 8 drunken immortals. So there's 8 deities, each of whom has their own distinct characteristics, and they each have their own, they each represent their own kung fu style. So there is, for instance, Crippled Lee, who has a powerful right leg, an iron crutch, and he uses his powerful right leg to deliver heavy kicks, basically. There's the flute player whose name I can't remember, and he has a very like um, uh, his style involves sort of these kinds of finger gestures and like attack. I don't know anything about kung fu, but like it, um, yeah, those kinds of attacks, things like this. And then there's Miss Ho, who is the only one of the 8 drunken immortals who is female, and she has a very sort of feminine, flirty style, which Freddy's initially like, shh, that's for girls. I'm not doing that. Eventually, Freddy masters the styles of the 8 drunken immortals. Um, um, so Hai is like, well, peace out. I've taught you everything I need to teach you. If you ever need me, I'll be there. While this has happened, Thunderleg has gotten a message from Mr. Lee, the father of the dude that Freddy beat up in the marketplace for not paying for the jade amulet. There was a whole bit where that guy was now crippled or some bullshit, and Mr. Lee was upset. But Mr. Lee has sort of competing business issues with Robert Wong. Um, and so Mr. Lee, presumably, we don't know this for sure, hires Thunderleg to kill Robert Wong. Robert Wong is lured out from his school, and Thunderleg starts beating him up. Robert is doing a pretty good job defending himself, but we can tell that he is likely to die. But Freddy and the chubby guy from the school show up. The chubby guy is basically just there kind of for comic relief, as he is, I think, throughout the movie, which I, as a, am not that keen on. But Freddy shows up and he's like, Father, I will help you because I have now mastered the techniques of drunken boxing. Before the fight can start between Freddy and Thunderlegs, So-Hai shows up, and he gives Freddy a bottle of wine to strengthen him because, weirdly enough, in this movie, wine is basically like Popeye's spinach. Because, like, there's one point where So-Hai is confronted by Ironhead, who has a very hard head, and who they had already beaten up, but also by the King of Bamboo, who has a sort of bow staff. And because So-Hai has not had his wine, his wrists are weak. He's got the DTs, it looks like, and so he is defeated by the King of Bamboo. The first time So-Hai has been defeated. And all because Freddy did not get him the proper wine. So, So-Hai shows back up. He throws Freddy his calabash, I guess, his gourd filled with wine. Freddy drinks it. And then he can take on Thunderleg. It's a back and forth fight. Initially, Freddy's doing quite well. The first sort of 4 Drunken Immortals styles go really well. Thunderleg is on the defensive. Then Freddy goes through 3 subsequent styles, and Thunderleg is just faster and better than he is. And finally, it comes down to Miss Ho's style, the final style. And Freddy turns to So-Hai, and he's like, I didn't practice this one because I didn't think it was that important. And So-Hai's like, just trust Miss Ho. She'll guide you. Which is what happens. And ultimately, Freddy is able to sort of combine the styles of these different drunken immortals. He periodically, throughout the fight, drinks more wine, as you do. Because if there's one thing that helps you in a fight, it's more alcohol. But ultimately, Freddy wins the fight. So, this is, I think, actually a really interesting movie. I said toward the beginning of this video that this is a coming-of-age story, but it is a distinctly Confucian coming-of-age story. Because the issue that Freddy Wong has is not that he's a bad person, necessarily, right? Like, he stands up for this poor guy whose jade amulet is broken by Mr. Lee's son. He clearly, and I mean, he's got some pretty good kung fu skills. He's reasonably good, even though he gets his ass kicked by a number of people. The problem is that Freddy Wong does not have proper respect. And in Confucian philosophy, this is really, really important. So Freddy does not treat his father with the proper reverence. We see this to a certain extent when he's actually in Robert Wong's presence. He does, and when he's initially fighting Thunderleg and getting beaten up and getting humiliated in the first fight scene between them, he does say that he's going to defend the reputation of his father's kung fu, but Freddy treats his aunt incredibly disrespectfully in the marketplace. Admittedly, he doesn't know she's his aunt, but also when he's eaten the food in that restaurant and tried to stiff the guy who turns out to be the owner of that restaurant, he claims that that is his father, and that's relatively disrespectful to Robert Wong. It's also important to note that in Confucianism, the teacher-student relationship is incredibly important. And the first thing we really see in terms of Freddy's approach to his teachers is when he humiliates and beats up the rather comic assistant teacher in Robert Wong's school, right? He clearly does not have reverence for this guy as an instructor. And in the early phases of his training with So Hai, we see the same thing. He continually tries to escape. He tries to trap So Hai in a vat of water, even saying he hopes he will drown. And so and the fact that Freddy sort of dismisses Miss Ho's style as a viable form of kung fu is really significant in terms of disrespecting an immortal, disrespecting basically a deity. And so what Freddy Wong needs to learn is the proper respect for those to whom reverence is due. His father, his older relations, his teachers, etc., etc. And ultimately, when he returns at the end of the movie, when he returns to his father's side to fight Thunderleg on his behalf, this is a gesture of reverence to defend his father in this way. It's also worth noting that when Freddy really begins to master this kung fu techniques of drunken boxing is when he accepts So Hai as a legitimate teacher. When he chooses to submit to So Hai, he's able to learn these techniques and not before. The other thing that points me to this being a Confucian coming-of-age story is after the aunt reveals that it was Freddy who accosted them in the marketplace, Robert says, "I'm going to beat you to death." And she says to him, "No, Robert, you cannot kill your own son. You cannot kill someone of your own flesh." And in Confucianism, responsibilities and respect are reciprocal. So it's not just as the son, Freddy has a responsibility of piety to his father also has responsibilities to his son. And so it's an interesting bit at that moment because Robert is clearly not demonstrating proper Confucian values. And the aunt, his sister, has to remind him of that proper Confucian value so that ultimately Freddy can have that as a proper model. Here is how you should behave, be a properly ethical person in the Confucian worldview.